So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, welcome to those who physically made it here to this meeting today. So great to see so many of you here. And secondly, welcome to all those who are joining us online. We're incredibly proud that we had so many people who wanted to be part of this conversation, that we are anticipating sort of over 500 people online, which is quite an achievement. So go people, that's what I say. We're here today to learn how our organisations, all of our organisations, can support our people as they manage their personal experience of both menstruation and menopause. It's not a subject that I've been encouraged to talk about in my very long 30 years of working life, and so it feels quite weird to be stood up here and saying those words with no medical background, no particular issues. So it's what a step forward we've all come. But it is a subject that, if it's handled right, can make a significant difference to our lives, both home and working, and also to the culture of all our workplace environments, which is quite a shift from where we are. Just so you know who I am, my name's Anne Hayes, and I'm Director of Sectors and Standards Development at BSI. I'm incredibly proud to work for BSI, and I'm incredibly proud that the BSI team, with the most amazing group of people and experts, have developed the guidance for us to use to improve the experiences of our colleagues in their working lives. Up front, I want to thank the panel chaired by Dr. Maria Tomlinson, who she asked me not to mention this, but just in case you want to know, it's her birthday today. So happy birthday. For all their work during the development of this guidance. I don't think any of you will appreciate quite how much work it is writing a standard. The people in the front row now do, and we've signed them up for a few more years, so well done, team. But it is a huge achievement that they've managed to get this out. And additionally, a big thank you goes to TOTM, who have supported us in putting on this event today, and we're very grateful to their support. As ever, for an event, for those in the room and a little bit for those online, there are some housekeeping points which I just quickly want to run through. So this event is being live streamed in listen-only mode. So if you're online and you have any issues, please go to the Q&A part of that app that I hope you're using. If an emergency alarm goes, please follow our team out via the side staircase in the catering area. There is no practice alarm due today, so if it does go, walk slowly, but go. We will ask for feedback after the event, and the presentations will all be provided by email. So if you want to get CPD points, you can get them, but you need to give us the feedback at the same time. So be very grateful to receive that. My ask of you today is to take the opportunity to learn about the standard, to ask questions in the sessions and breaks, and I hope that you will remain around for the networking event at the end of the day. But also, just so you're aware, we've had almost 4,000 downloads to date, which the standard's been out for a month, and that's really quite an achievement and sounds quite a big number, and we are really pleased with that. It's huge progress. However, there are approximately 5.5 million SMEs in the UK. So therefore, so far, we've hit 0.07% of those. So if you add in large businesses, we have a massive opportunity to make a change. And we anticipate that this is a tool that can and will contribute to making that change. And there is no excuse for not having that conversation. So let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our amazing host for the day, co-author of Cracking the Menopause and co-founder of Menopause Mandate, Alice Smellie.
Thank you. How lovely to be here, and what a pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. And huge congratulations to BSI, whose new standard is both exciting and groundbreaking. An entire event about the subject of menstruation and menopause in the workplace is something that even a few years ago would have been almost unimaginable. It really is only recently that we've started to acknowledge these entirely natural life stages, even though they affect half the population and always have done. So this frankly brilliant standard is much needed. I have read the entire thing, and it's clear that both companies and our colleagues are going to benefit. The breadth of the standard encompasses diversity, practicality, education, and awareness. The breadth of interest in both the standard and today's event is unbelievable. I gather that demand for today was so high it sold out entirely like a Taylor Swift concert, and it's therefore being live streamed. And the breadth and quality of the excellent speakers reflects all of the above. So first of all, I am very pleased to welcome Helen Tomlinson, the UK's first ever menopause employment champion. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much, everybody, for that warm welcome. So before I go into my introduction, I just wanted to share something with you that happened to me yesterday in the office. So my day job, as I will allude to shortly, is Head of Talent and Inclusion at the Adecco Group. We are a large recruitment organisation globally, and yesterday we had a new starter who he's come to join us. I was our Director of Social Media, a role that we didn't even have when I first started in recruitment. We didn't even have social media, let alone a director of it. And when he came into the room, he introduced himself. We were chatting about recruitment, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, of course you can." He said, "Did you have heavy periods when you were perimenopausal?" And I stopped in my tracks and I thought, wow, that's a bit of an opener, isn't it, for someone I've not even met this guy before? And I said, "Yeah, I did." He said, "Did you have endometriosis?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Because my wife's got endometriosis and she's really, really struggling." And I just took a moment after I thought, God, that's a bold opening, to actually think, even probably 12 months ago, maybe 6 months ago even, would somebody have sat down in a meeting in the workplace with somebody they didn't know and asked them that question? And I just thought we've come so far in such a relatively short period of time. So it's really stuck with me as that, and I thought I've got to tell you that this afternoon, because I think the work that everybody is doing, and particularly this new standard, will really have a huge impact. But yeah, good for him, and I really hope I have loads more conversations like that in the workplace and outside of the workplace. So my name is Helen Tomlinson, and as I said, my day job is Head of Talent and Inclusion at the Adecco Group. But the reason I'm here today is as my role as the government's first UK menopause employment champion, and that absolutely exists to raise awareness of menopause in the workplace, to support the 4 million women in the workplace aged between 45 to 55 who are experiencing menopause. It is not limited to those women, obviously, because there are women experiencing perimenopause. The average age is 41. Early onset menopause can happen much earlier, whether through symptoms of various conditions or through forced menopause, through cancer treatment or forced hysterectomy. There are also 630,000 women who are claiming universal credit in that age bracket as well, who would probably love to come back into the workplace. So we need to consider those in addition to that. And to ensure that they are fully supported and can continue fulfilling their career potential beyond menopause. We will do this by bringing together in sectors supported by sector bodies to ensure that best practice is shared, allyship provided and awareness raised. This will ensure that women are supported whether they work for a large employer or one of the small, medium to enterprises that we've already mentioned this afternoon. So important that the majority of people actually work in a small to medium enterprise. So there's no reason why they shouldn't get the same support as women who work for large employers. It isn't about competitive advantage, and I was just speaking to the gentleman on the front row who we're going to hear from shortly, when we were talking about political advantage. It's not about political advantage. It's not about employers having competitive advantage. It's about making the world of work better for every woman who is working and going through perimenopause or menopause. It's about them thriving regardless of their employer. So I took on the role because I'm passionate about women reaching their full potential throughout their career. This period of life should not be any different. Perimenopause and menopause is absolutely not a time to step down, step back, or step out of your career. With the right support, women can go on to have arguably the best 10, 15 or 20 years of their career. The standard will be a great enabler to support this. And what I really love about it is it's free of charge, universal and applicable to all businesses, large or small, regardless of sector. And that is my main driver in my role, to make sure that the work we do is fit for purpose by sector, regardless of cultural difference, socio-economic demographic, who your employer is, the size of their budget, the size of their HR team, the size of their ED&I strategy. It's for everybody. I particularly like the fact that it also covers menstruation in the workplace, because whilst this can be a headwind for women of all ages, it's a key debilitating symptom of menopause, and brings me right back to the conversation. If I hadn't gone out in public and talked about my heavy periods during perimenopause, which 44% of women experience, and I would argue is one of the most difficult things to start a conversation around with your line manager. If I hadn't have been open and honest about that and started that conversation, the guy that joined our organisation yesterday probably wouldn't have felt compelled to ask me about my heavy periods. So whilst we've made some great steps forward, there are some really great achievements that we still need to make, and I'm really confident that the BSI standard is a really good starting point for those conversations. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for your warm welcome.
Helen, thank you so very much. That's a great story. And now we move on to our first speaker. Kylie Yale is Head of Commercial at eco-friendly period care product company TOTM. Kylie developed a period dignity workplace scheme that launched in over 5,000 sites in the UK, with expansion into Europe happening this year. And she's going to speak about creating a period positive workplace. Thank you so much, Kylie.
Hi everyone, this is a bit bigger than my usual audience, so I hope I do the presentation and the talk justice. I'm just going to talk to you a bit today about period care and the period sort of dignity scheme that we've implemented into the workplace, why we've implemented it, and some of the things around that kind of helping women to be able to talk about periods and the menopause more openly than we've probably ever been able to previously. So there's quite a number of issues around menstruation in the workplace. People have never kind of really wanted to talk about it. In fact, I was asked on the video interview earlier, and I said, actually, I think if it doesn't exist, if it's not talked about, then people just don't believe it. They can sweep it under the carpet. But employers can't do that anymore. You know, we're a much more female-heavy workplace than we were sort of 15, 20 years ago. And these issues are affecting people and affecting people in quite some big ways these days. Part of the reason we developed our period dignity workplace, which I'm absolutely super proud of, is we wanted to work with employers to be able to give their employees a provision that really, really helps them in the workplace and helps them not just with their kind of general day-to-day period well-being, but it helps around all the other things that people don't actually really want to talk about, like endometriosis, like Helen mentioned. It's a real big illness and it can be quite debilitating for people. Our products help with that because they're organic, they're sustainable, etc. And we've made it more, more accessible and made it much more open for people to be able to talk about those illnesses in the workplace. You've also got PMDD, again, really debilitating. Helen touched on, and I can fully vouch for this. I am going through perimenopause at the moment, so brain fog is a big thing. So excuse me if I forget anything today. But also the heavy periods that go along with that. And I've been having numerous discussions with people since I've been here today around, well, actually, what do I do? Because I could just be sitting on a chair at work, and all of a sudden, I know my period started, I know it's going to be heavy. What do? I've got to kind of rush out to the toilet. But then when I get to the toilet, I might have forgotten my bag, or there's that kind of whole stigma around, I'm going to scroll along to the toilet with my bag and then everyone's going to know I'm on my period. And nobody wants to do that anymore, and everybody should be open about menstruation, because it happens to all of us females. So we provide the provision in the toilets so that people haven't got to worry about that. They also haven't got to worry about talking about their periods anymore. We've helped with implementing the menstruation policy in the workplace. So people can be more open and go to their line manager and say, do you know what, I've got a really heavy period today. I'm suffering with, headaches, stomach cramps, and all of the other raft of illnesses that go along with not illnesses, but raft of symptoms that go along with having a period and going through the menopause and perimenopause. So it's much more acceptable with having these policies in place that we can now go and talk to people, and we can actually get the advice and the help that's needed. As a business, as I say, we've launched in 5,000 workplaces, and that's anywhere from really, really tiny companies, really small businesses, schools, colleges, universities, and we go in and we offer talks all around everything that's important around menstruation and the menopause. So not just about how your period will affect you, it's all about nutrition when you're on your period. It will be around the symptoms related to perimenopause and what to do about those really heavy periods and things that you can do to help. And the feedback that we've had is it's made people in business feel much more included and much more able to talk about periods without having this big stigma around it. And people have actually come back to us and said it's great, because we felt, although it was just a video kind of talk, we felt able to actually ask questions around our period. We would never sat in front of our colleagues and done that just on an average day. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine the conversations that go on in our office, but we find that very normal. We've completely normalised periods, which is what everybody should be doing, and what part of this policy is about. So yeah, that's me. If you guys have got any questions, great. I will be around for the networking session afterwards, so if you want to come and grab me, ask any questions, be more than happy to answer any. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kylie. That was really interesting. I'm now very pleased to introduce Lauren Sheeran, founder and CEO of Women of a Certain Stage, who is going to talk about recognizing menopause in the workplace. In her early 40s, she left her job thinking that she had early onset dementia, but in fact it was just menopause. Lauren is now dedicated to normalizing all things menstruation to menopause in the workplace and empowering individuals to thrive. She also has, hands down, the wittiest company name ever. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I can talk about this topic until the cows come home, so my phone's in front of me to keep me on time. Wow. I'm really super nervous today, which is really unusual because I love doing public speaking. But I'm nervous because this is so important to me. Having the standard launched is a huge milestone. Having a document that we can independently signpost employers to is such a massive step forward from where we were back in 2014 when I left my job thinking I had early onset dementia. So I genuinely want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's been involved in pulling this together, for the lengthy debates, the different opinions about what words should be used where and when and how, and what inclusivity meant, how we made sure that these standards really had life breathed into them so that they were a super useful and meaningful document for organisations of all sizes. So what is it that an organisation needs to do? What is it that we need to be looking at? And why are we actually even talking about menopause at work? What's best practice look like, and what's your commitment going to be going forward? That for me is probably the key question for today, whether it's menstruation, menstrual health or menopause. What's your commitment going to be as you're listening to the day, as you're talking to each other, as we're networking together? What's your one takeaway going to be? What difference are you going to make as you go back to your organisation? How can you help us move this forward so that no one has to leave their job, no one has to hang their head in shame, hide in embarrassment, or feel weak and vulnerable because something's going on with them that's an entirely natural biological process? So I'm just going to quickly recap because there's so much information out there, and we know that what do we do when we don't know about something? We go online. We use a search engine, and we come up with all sorts. But Dr. Search Engine can lead us down all sorts of little garden paths and tell us all sorts of interesting things. We talk about menopause being 45 to 55. That's a UK statistic. So if you're part of a global organisation, you might find you've got colleagues, if they're living in the States, might have a slightly later menopause. Or if they're in Asia, they might have a slightly earlier menopause. Our symptoms change depending what culture and what country you're in. There's so many factors that we're yet to understand that really, really breathe life into why we experience menopause in so many different ways. And so we have to keep an open mind and use trusted resources and sources of information to get the best quality information to help ourselves and to help everyone else. So menopause is typically classed as the time of life when we have gone for 12 months without a monthly bleed. And at that moment, we become menopausal. Thereafter, we're postmenopausal for the rest of our lives. The reality is that the whole journey really starts a little bit earlier when we're in perimenopause. And perimenopause is the time when our natural monthly cycle, whatever that is to us, a monthly could be 17 days, as mine was, or it could be 34, or it could be entirely erratic. Everyone's different. But when your cycle starts to change and you notice differences, it might become heavier or lighter. You might find that your periods are closer together or further apart. And you might notice a few symptoms creep in. Anxiety. That juggling act of life could suddenly become a little bit trickier, but you're not really sure why. Because the generation coming up to and going through menopause now hasn't been educated routinely on the matter. Our parents haven't spoken to us about it. And so we end up hiding behind this thing that even we don't know. Over 86% of people, of women, don't know what menopause really is, nor how it's going to impact them. So we've got perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. But the exciting thing for me is the conversation that we're beginning to have. The conversation that means that we can be more open. The conversation that means that we can say the word period or menstruation or menopause, that we can get the right help and support, that we can stand up and know that it's right to advocate for ourselves at a time when we need that help and support. We need to teach people what a normal monthly cycle is. Learn what the things are that we can do to successfully ask for the help and support, to learn what it is that we're deciding to do on our day-to-day lives, the impact. We've heard already about nutrition, hydration, movement, sleep, stress. All of these things play a massive role in how we experience our monthly cycle and how we experience menopause. So we've got perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. And the other exciting thing for me is the fact that by the time you get to menopause, you've probably had a monthly cycle for about 37 years. You've got a whole other 37 years of your adult life ahead of you. And that's what's exciting. We're only halfway through our adult life when we get to menopause. So we get to step into our personal power. We get to use all our skills, knowledge, and experience. And we get to give back and to do all the things that we've ever wanted to do because we are just rich in our ability to juggle everything that life comes at, everything that we've managed up to the point of becoming menopausal and having periods. Can you imagine what we can do after? So when we think about the symptoms, I'm not going to list them because I know I've got an audience in the room and an audience online that absolutely is familiar with most of the symptoms. When I first started studying this nearly 10 years ago, we were told there were 34 symptoms of menopause. The reality is we don't know what that actual number is because the key hormones that drive our monthly cycle and our menopause, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, they are integral to every single one of our body systems. Our skin, our biggest organ in our body, our vaginal health, our vulval health, our bladder, our heart health, our brain health, our cognitive function. So if you've got three key hormones that are driving these, and they're beginning to fluctuate and not be in sync as they were, as they're declining as we hit menopause, is it any wonder that our skin feels a bit weird, that we're thinking, feeling, and behaving a little bit differently than we were before, until we can settle down, figure out our best way forward, and step into what I reckon is the best part of our life, being postmenopausal. So how long does this go on for? Any guesses? Too long. Absolutely. So we know that it's completely unique. There will be some people, maybe somewhere in the region of 10 to 20% of people that will sail through menopause without experiencing any symptoms whatsoever. But the reality is about 25% of us, possibly more, will have really severe symptoms or symptoms that need some form of intervention to enable us to manage and to stay on our A game going forward. And the other 55% will probably need to make some minor adjustments or other changes to be able to carry on doing what they do. But the whole experience, we say, and depending what studies you read, you're going to hear different information, but somewhere between 2 and 5 to 12 and 15 years. It's a big chunk of our life, and in the workplace, that is a significant time, because often we're at the most senior roles. We're typically juggling the most we've ever juggled with families. You might be like me with a young child at home as a sole parent, someone with lifelong medical needs, working in a senior role, family 400 miles away, and just trying to make it all work. And one minute if things working really well, and then the next minute you're not quite sure what's going on. I see a lot of nods. Yeah? But we're in it together. And there's somewhere in the excess of 4.5–5 million menopausal women in the UK. But let's not forget that when we talk about menopause, we're not just talking about people, we're not just talking about women. We've got to be mindful that we're talking about a transgender community, or a non-binary and a gender questioning community as well. So often you'll hear people saying, you'll hear talks or read documents saying people rather than just referring to women. So when I do say women today, it's because I'm talking about studies or research, information that's come about as a result of most of what we've looked at, which is typically higher socioeconomic Caucasian women. And that in itself reflects the fact that there is so much more work to be done to truly understand menopause and to understand why different solutions work for different people going forward. So if we just flick this over to the real reality of where we're at just now, you know, there are a number of issues, number of challenges that we're facing at the moment as employers. We know that people are working harder, people are feeling burnt out. We know that it's one of the leading causes of people to be absent from work at the moment. We know that attraction and retention has never been trickier. We're hearing every single day, I'm reading online, I'm hearing from colleagues about just how challenging it is to find the right people. We also know that with the cost of living crises, that there is adding additional complications to people being present at work who maybe really ought to be seeking help and support. We know that people are turning up into jobs and into roles where sheer fear of not taking that salary home is keeping them there and stopping them from going and asking their doctor, their manager. They don't want to be seen as weak and vulnerable. And add into this mix menopause, add into this mix adenomyosis, add into the mix endo, add into the mix fibroids, add into the mix everything else that we go through as women, then that just compounds everything we're already experiencing. So it's really, really crucial and really important that we can normalize the topics of menstruation, menstrual health, and menopause at work. So I think I might have already alluded to some of the conversations I've had this morning. You know, this is not a minority topic. This is not something that we should be talking about. Women make up 51% of the world's population. Coming up to 2030, 1.2 billion people will be experiencing menopause or be postmenopause. That's not a small number. So it's something that we need to be taking mainstream, that we need to be talking about. I'm going to challenge you straight away, so I'm going to invite you to say after me, menopause. 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 Thank you. And I mentioned this statistic already. This is one of the statistics of the many that are out there saying that there's a cost of roughly £10 billion cost economy in the UK alone. So when you start multiplying that up, you know, globally, this starts being a ridiculously large number that we, every single one of us, has got an opportunity to impact and to make a difference. But why me? Why am I standing here talking to you today? Well, let me take you back to the 5th of November 2014. Senior exec, financial services, leading global teams in India, America, the UK, absolutely loved my job. I worked in regulatory and compliance change, totally adored what I did. I took all the regulatory stuff that no one could understand, including the people that wrote it sometimes, broke it down into bite-sized chunks, and then worked with my team to deliver it. I absolutely love the complexity. I love the intellectual stimulation. I love getting to know my people. Until the day I sat in a meeting, unable to get a word out of my mouth. Or when I started having to take 4 cups of hot water into meetings and sip them because my throat was so tight with anxiety, I couldn't squeak a word out. Or the day that my boss called me in to his office and he said, "It's been noticed you've been walking around this place as if you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's not exactly becoming of a senior leader in this organization, is it? I think you were happier when you were doing that personal training thing of yours. Something for you to think about tonight." That conversation took away any self-esteem and any self-confidence that I had left. I went back to my desk and I picked up my bags and I went to work from home. Now, I was lucky, I was senior enough to be able to make that decision way before the pandemic. But not long after that, I left my job. I left my job because I thought I had early onset dementia. And it took 3 months until my doctor turned around and told me that I had just been through the menopause. And so began my quest to chat with other people, to have conversations with former colleagues, and to start to work with companies, to start to talk about menopause and understand, was it only me? And we learned very, very quickly, no, it wasn't only me. So we started having menopause social events, which is one of the most powerful things an organization can do. Just bringing people together to talk. Yes, it costs time to administer, and yes, it costs time to bring people together, let them have half an hour, 40 minutes away from their day job. But the power in being seen, being heard, and being listened to is unbelievable. I wish that someone had reached out and inquired what was going on with me and how they could help and support. So that one step is something that all organizations can do. So I've mentioned, I've got a bit of a portfolio background. I've worked in lots of different industries, but I have also, as a result of, background in psychology and personal training, nutrition, I've dug really deep over the last 10 years to understand what the link with all of those things are with menopause. And we blend all of these lifestyle choices that we all make on a day-to-day basis into all the work that we do. But when we're working with organizations, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail because I believe the slides will be available and we could be all day otherwise, right? And I'm sure that's not part of the plan. But when we are working with organizations, we invite them to look at their strategy. We invite them to look at the colleague journey right from the get-go, right from the job design, person spec, making sure that they're created in a way that is truly inclusive, making sure that they are menopause savvy, menopause supportive. Looking at the recruitment process, is it conducted in a way that is open, that says to someone going through menopause who might have had a negative experience, that we're going to listen to you and support you because we recognise and value you for your skills. When you onboard somebody, is menopause mentioned in that process? Is menstrual health and menstruation and menopause mentioned in the onboarding process? Is there a flag in your HR system where you can talk about women's health issues or period problems or menopause? Are you holding exit interviews? I won't ask for a show of hands because I know there won't be many go up, but there's very few organizations that I have witnessed who do really great exit interviews. They're a mine of information. They're an amazing opportunity to learn where you can make changes and improvements in your business. So we look at, we work through the whole strategy about making the organization truly menstruation and menopause savvy and supportive.
We talk about the colleague journey. We make sure that we're looking at each aspect of that. We look at key metrics to make sure that if you're going to start talking about menopause, if you're going to look at the standard, pick out the key information from the standard, make sure that you're applying that and you're sharing it with your colleagues, breathing life into it in a way that's fit with your culture, that this starts to make a real difference so you can monitor and you can measure on a year in, year out basis. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of doing a standalone menopause policy or a standalone period policy. I'd much rather see an overarching wellbeing policy where each individual knew that whatever was going on with them, they could talk to a key individual, a menopause champion, a wellbeing champion, a mental health first aider, a line manager, a trusted colleague in occupational health or HR, whoever it is, because the company culture is inclusive. But a menopause policy or a menopause guidance document is a great place to start too. The key thing here is there's no one right way to move this forward. The key thing is to understand where you are as an organisation and to think about what's that one step, that 1% difference that you can make that's going to actually impact people in a positive way going forward. How do you make your male manager feel more comfortable when they notice someone's not quite themselves to feel confident to have a conversation before something becomes a performance issue? How do you signpost people to the information so they can get the right help and support that they need as well? And again, you know, there's so many areas where we can access help and support, but often it's tucked away in a file somewhere and we don't know about it. So how do you let people know regularly what's involved in your employee assistance program, in your private medical, if that's appropriate? How do you let people know where guidance documents are and how they can access them? If you've got a policy, and I asked this at an event recently in Barcelona, whereby we asked the room who had a menopause policy. Pretty much the whole room's hands went up. Then I asked the question, and who's read it? So if no one's read it, how can we breathe life into it? How can it make a difference? Think about when you pour those blood, sweat and tears into creating a document, that you do something that puts the energy, that puts the communications behind it so that it genuinely makes a difference as well. So just to wrap up, you know, thinking about what you can do, listening to each of the speakers, listening to the panel, listening to each other during the breaks and the networking opportunities today, just think about what that one key thing is that you can do that will make the biggest difference to the most people. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I've been keeping what I can only describe as the most eagle eye ever on the timing. We do, and you're actually slightly behind. I just wondered if there were any questions for Lauren. Lady over there. There is a microphone. Is that all right? Thank you. I'll come and get it.
That's my nerves going super fast today.
Thank you.
While we're waiting, I will show. Lauren, thank you. That was amazing. I think I work at UCL. I'm a professor at UCL, and we don't have a menopause policy. We have a guidance, and we're working towards a policy. So we're having regular meetings about it, and that will be our endpoint. But we have stressed that we do think we need, and we will be reading it. I think we're sort of alluding to this. I think the previous speakers have been alluding to this. I've done a lot of talks in companies. I think what we probably need, especially in smaller companies, rather than just a menopause person or maybe a menstruation person, I work in reproductive health education. I've founded something called the International Reproductive Health Education Collaboration, long title. But I don't think every line manager is going to feel comfortable about supporting people going through any of the stages we're going to talk about today. So I think having a champion or ambassador in each company, but I think they should cover all of reproductive health, because all of these things we're going to talk about today are all interlinked. So if we just calls them the menopause coach or the menopause ambassador, when we have a woman who's 28 and is having problems with her period, who's she going to go to? So that's what I'm suggesting to companies. It's a reproductive health, and we have someone who's approachable within that, and they're the person we go to, not each line manager.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the point about it's got to be a good fit for your organisation, and if that works at UCL, then that's great. And I know that that would work well in other organisations too. The reality is most people who step up to be mental health first aiders or menopause champions or advocates for period health, it's because they've had a personal experience, either they lived experience or they've supported somebody through that. And I think that it's always best to go to the front line of an organisation and ask them what they want, so that it's a really good cultural fit for that organisation. And that's why I'd say that there is no one size fits all. There isn't a right way to do this. And I think that's a great model. And I've seen lots of different models work lots of different ways. So again, I think that showcasing things that work is a great way to give best practice, but there's lots of best practice out there and there's different ways of doing things. So thank you for that. And good to meet you in person.
Lady in the green over there.
Hi, Emma Cox from Endometriosis UK. Great talk, thank you for that, and for championing all the work for those with in the menopause in the workplace. Just to pick up on a question, I really dislike the phrase reproductive health. I think it phrases it in people's minds and frames it as, well, in this country we have babies between about 20, 25 and 40, and it loses the whole life cycle of menstrual well-being, menstrual health, menopause. So I agree completely that it'd be great to see those overall policies, but my personal view is that reproductive health is not a useful term for everybody with female reproductive organs.
Yeah, I think you know that comes back to individualising it to the organisation, and it's about asking, doing your surveys, asking your employees, asking your colleagues what's going to be a good fit for them.
Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry, there was a lady just behind who had her hand up first. There's time for both of you.
Hi, thank you. Fantastic presentation, thank you so much. So I'm Rachel Seth from the CIPD. I just wanted to pick up on the point around the role of the line manager and how we can best support people with menopause in organisations, because I think that's a really important point. I completely agree that there's not necessarily a one size fits all, and that we should have as many points of support and contact for people as possible. At CIPD, we've got menopause champions. One of the most enthusiastic is a man. So there are all sorts of possibilities. But in terms of the role of the line manager, on the one hand, yes, I agree. I can understand that not every line manager will necessarily feel comfortable. Somebody might not want to approach their line manager. Nevertheless, I think they're a really important link in the whole chain for a lot of different reasons. And it's great. I welcome the annex here in the standard with sort of guidance for line managers. At CIPD, we're very consciously producing for every kind of wellbeing guidance. We produce standalone, very accessible, easy to understand guidance for line managers themselves, because we recognise that the role of line managers is really key. They're the gateway for support, for accessing a lot of policies. They're the ones that control things like workloads and working conditions. They should hopefully have the kind of relationship with somebody that is based on trust. But I wanted to go a bit further and say guidance is good, but actually if organisations are thinking about how can they make sure line managers are comfortable, confident in this area, then it needs to go even further, because they do need those kind of behaviours as well, like empathy, not to shy away from personal issues, some of which are so intimate, somebody discussing things like heavy bleeding and so on. You have to feel extremely comfortable around that. So I think it just needs to go further in terms of that kind of framework. They need to have the time and the space and understand what their role is as well. So I think it's just looking a bit deeper into that role, because it is still a really important one, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, the reality is that the last few years has taught us a lot in some respects, but also we've moved full steam ahead to try and catch up and make good some of the stuff we've lost during the pandemic. And a lot of what I'm seeing, I work globally, so we've got a team of 500 people around the world who deliver in culturally sensitive ways and lead on menstruation and menopause. what we're seeing in the line management training that we deliver is very much a bunch of line managers who have got a workload that's way up there. They've got zero amount of time to actually manage their team. So when there is a performance issue, all of a sudden their energy goes on the performance issue and their day job ends up being impacted. So they're in that juggling position of not quite knowing what to do first. So I think, well, what we do is we use menstruation or menopause or both to look at soft skills training. So how do you get to know your colleagues? What's normal for a colleague? What's their behaviour typically like? Do they have a monthly ebb and flow to how they behave and how they interact? Are there times of the month when they're a bit more withdrawn, they're a bit more engaged? So I think a lot of the work we need to do with line managers is actually building up their confidence and building up their ability to develop their soft skills. And then you can start to layer in top or use your menstruation and your menopause training to actually build in those soft skills. It's not just about going, these are the facts about menopause, notice it in your people and then step in. That doesn't help anyone. It's actually, how do you notice when someone isn't their normal self? What language do you use? What body language do you use? What's that person's individual personality and communication style preference like? What's yours like? How do you meet them where they are so that you can actually engage and not repel them? So I think everything you've said is absolutely spot on, but we need to do a lot more with the line managers, and this is just one new topic for them to take on board on top of all the other D&I, well-being and every other topic they have to do as well as their day job. So I think the more we can blend all of this together rather than trying to do lots of different trainings, and it can be done, and it can be done really, really well. And there's, again, there's lots of models, there's lots of different ways of doing these things, but again, just looking at the overall annual plan for training and seeing how things can be put together rather than having disparate training is really, really helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments and questions. You may go. Thank you very much indeed. And actually, two facts that leapt into my mind while you were speaking, Lauren, were firstly, we have between 400 and 500 periods in our lives. So that's quite a lot if you are having a difficult time with your periods. And secondly, having interviewed many, many women who go through menopause, I've known women who are having hot flushes well into their 70s. So again, there is no, sorry everyone, there is no actual cut-off date. And with that cheery fact, next we have Jean Hewitt, Senior Inclusive Design Consultant at Bureau Happold. Jean is one of the leading practitioners in the field of inclusive design and a long-standing member of BSI Committee, Design of an Accessible and Inclusive Environment. It's with great pleasure I introduce you here today.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm really, really pleased to be here because I think the built environment does have a role in all of this, and I think it can be overlooked quite easily. So I'm going to talk about this standard, but I want to start from inclusive design principles. So I work in inclusive design, and what we always look at is these 5 principles to start with. So placing people at the heart of the process, acknowledging that we all have human diversity and difference, we're all a little bit different from one another, and we want to have environments that give us the dignity, autonomy, choice and spontaneity as we're using them, and provide for flexibility in use. Now that flexibility is just as important and relevant to menopausal and menstrual health as it would be for any other disability, faith need and so on. So I really think that that's where we need to be and where it kind of fits. So in terms of this standard, as you know, it applies across all sectors, all environments and everything. And that was quite difficult when I was looking at the built environment section, is that some of us are in offices and it's actually quite much easier to try and kind of manage around that. So you've got a kind of fixed type of environment, but there are also many women that are traveling sometimes across the world or across the country, might be on a building site, they might be a postwoman or something like that. And then that environment, what environment they will be in, becomes more tricky. So I'll skip over this because I know others have kind of covered this slide quite well and the terminology we use, and get straight into the built environment. But before I do that, intersectionality has been mentioned by a couple of previous speakers. We are not just a woman experiencing menstrual, menopausal, endometriosis or whatever. We are also a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a worker, a carer perhaps. So all of these things matter too. And I think that for me is kind of the built environment is part of that. So we may have to cater for both the immediate need that you might have through a hormonal change for whatever reason that is, alongside being perhaps a carer for an elderly parent, or sometimes for young children, which quite often coincide also with menstrual and menopausal times in our life. The other intersectionality impact examples would be neurodiversity. I was working on a British standard, a PAS, around designing for neurodiversity. So this is a very broad umbrella term that will cover all our neurocognitive types and includes people with neurodivergent conditions such as ADHD, autism and so on. And we know already that people with some of those traits will experience a different type of menopause. They will perhaps be self-managing their disability, their difference, their sensory difference, and suddenly it will change because of menopause. And I think we mustn't overlook that. So it's like, well, you've always self-managed, you've been fine, what's the problem? Suddenly you get a hormonal change and everything's different again. In terms of the impact of physical aspects of work, they are broad and many, as you will know, but from the built environment, we've obviously got some occupational hazards to consider. It could be noise, it could be chemicals. These are things that affect us during pregnancy as well, so you'll be well aware of them. Even the uniforms we wear, could they be bamboo or cotton? Do they have to be that kind of sticky nylon when you're having a hot flush? Prolonged sitting and standing, either is not great for us. So these things need considering as well. And whether we're working away from our office space or in it, what sort of features do we have around us? So is this jumping without me touching it, or it seems to be? So frequent manual handling, highly repetitive handling and things like that can also affect people in those peripatetic roles. Some of the examples that may help when you're considering the built environment would be things like improving acoustics. So we know, for example, at those difficult times of the month or difficult periods, we can become hypersensitive to noise in the same way that somebody with a neurodivergent trait might be. And that can cause increased headaches from flicker and things like that. We can become much more sensitive to the environment around us, have a much more sensitive sense of smell. Some people will not experience that until they get pregnant. Other people might experience it every month. Certain smells will make them very nauseous and sick. So all of these things need to be considered, the products that we put into buildings. So even when we're buying a carpet, for example, choosing one that's not going to off gas and make everyone feel a little bit ill. So all of these things matter. Easy access, of course, to cool drinking water is going to be helpful, or maybe a warm drink if you're feeling cold, because it can be either. So all of the things around the T points, the distances where you can get those amenities, really, really important. And even the fact that you can move around. So the sit-stand desks are great, and so is hybrid working, because you can actually maybe choose to work at home on your kind of the days that you're not feeling so great. But not everybody can do that. So I work previously, my previous career was in facilities management, so estates management, running buildings. Almost none of those people can actually stay the day at home because they need to be out there running an important building somewhere. We need furniture that allows us kind of to be a bit more flexible, and maybe choice of where we sit in an office. Things like eliminating flicker, because LED lighting can flicker if you don't design it correctly, and that photosensitivity can cause headaches and migraines. And lots of women I know with their monthlies will get things like migraines, and again in menopause. So I've got family members who are very young, who've experienced quite drastic symptoms really around early menopause, surgically induced menopause if you like, and that can cause very significant migraines. So the lighting and things like that can really make a difference to that. And I think generally bringing biophilic considerations in, so this is things that we would find in nature, maybe views out or plants, flowers, maybe timber, so natural products in the environment can be really helpful to help in everybody's well-being, but will particularly help at these pinch points, if you like, in our lives. From a thermal comfort point of view, because I know hot flushes are kind of high on the list when we experience them, identifying the cooler parts of the building. Why is it that we don't say to employees, actually, there's 2 stair cores that we can give you access to that are really lovely and cool, they're never heated, And you could just feel that you could go there for 2 minutes, because these hot flushes don't usually last that long. You know, can we do something about the lighting? Can we go for a cool, you know, if you're working in a hot environment, like a bakery or something like that, having cooler lighting psychologically makes you feel a bit cooler too. So all of these things interact and can make us feel perhaps a bit more in control. And providing blinds or curtains to block out bright sunlight will also kind of help. That heat radiating through a building can make you even feel hotter, and humidity is definitely #1 enemy, I think. So airflow, the ability to open a window, having the air conditioning correct, all of these things are really important. And finishes and fabrics. Well, one of the things a member of my family said to me is, oh, it just makes such a difference just changing bedding. Think of that in a workplace. You're sitting on a plastic covered seat. Changing that to bamboo or cotton, or just having your own bamboo or cotton cushion that you could put on it, suddenly not feeling all that stickiness coming through. So there can be really little things that we can self-manage sometimes, but sometimes we need the help of designers, and sometimes we need the facility and estate managers to help us, or even inform us where to find these things. So ease of access to those cooler areas in the building is important. Proximity to hot and cold drinks. Somewhere private for medication and treatment. I'm working a lot on, with others, some in this room, on inclusive environments and toilets a lot, and I think they're a key area for people. And even having a shelf in a toilet that's got a basin that's near the pan means if you're using sustainable menstrual products, that's going to be much easier for you rather than coming out to a common area. As a shelf would be really helpful with someone with stoma management, also helps someone who's having to inject for endometriosis or trying to get pregnant or whatever the reason. All of these things, very little interventions in the built environment, really, really helpful. There is some more on this in the PAS 6463, the neurodiversity standard, on quiet and restorative spaces, and I think that is a good place to look if you want to find a room, how to design a room, run a room that can be peaceful, that can be somewhere to go and reset when it's just becoming too much, or when you're getting that brain fog, or for some other reason. So that's a good link document, I think, that we've already mentioned. Toilets and showers are obviously significant. How important is it for a woman at those times to be able to know that she's got somewhere she can go freshen up, to know that she's got a locker where she can have a complete change of clothes? I know when I went through my menopause, which was very early, because again surgically induced, but not particularly horrible, but very traumatic in terms of blood loss, the ability to have been able to store clothes and go and shower would have been really, really helpful. So I think there's a lot we can do in the built environment, both in terms of the way we design it, the way we run it, the facilities we provide in it, which could include, of course, the menstrual products, but also how we dispose of them easily as well. I think in humid conditions, providing dehumidifiers, as I say, open the windows, make it the norm. I had somebody say to me once, oh, it's okay, we've got a fan that someone can come and ask for. Actually, that isn't, I don't want to put a sign on my desk and say, hey, look at me, I'm menopausal, I got the fan on my desk. You kind of want it to be a bit more subtle than that, don't we? And I think the inclusion passports, which we can have for any disability, they can be really helpful in recording what agreements have been considered, how you do that, how you communicate it when you go to another site and so on. So there's a lot that you can do on this, and even just having the uniforms that are a bit flexible in size. So if you've got a bloated tummy, still going to work, you don't feel like you're kind of really restricted, and of course cotton or bamboo or something like that. Advanced information, really, really important on this. So I think if you know the environment you're going into, you can dress accordingly. So you can make sure that you've got cooler clothing on. You can maybe book a desk that's on the cooler side of the building if you're experiencing a lot of hot flushes that month. You might want to book a room or a desk that's near to the toilets. You might want it nearer to the cold water supply. You might want to not be near the toilets because the scents are really off-putting. Let's give people some choice back where we can. I think that's a really helpful thing to do. And that's just a few links there to finish. So.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Does anyone have any questions? The lady over here, that was a very rapid response. Is there a microphone? Or you can shout. Thank you so much.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Fatima Usman, and I'm from the Department for Education. That's really thought-provoking. And when you were going through the slides about the built environment, it's made me think about what we've been looking at. So we've been looking at the facilities and what's available within our own department. And of course, we're a government department, so a lot of what we do, there's consideration across split sites in different cities and what's in place all over the country. One of your slides indicated the need for toilets with individual basins. And it made me think a lot of the new government hub buildings that have been developed recently have unisex toilets. Yeah. So I just wanted to pause there and just ask you what your thoughts are on that, and in terms of what you just sort of described about the built environment there.
It's a difficult one because I know at the moment we haven't got clear guidance on what we should be doing around the toilet mix. But I think if we have some male and female as alongside some what I would call universal or unisex, gender neutral, whatever you want to call them, that can be the most helpful way so people have choices. I do think the self-contained toilet with a basin in with the toilet pan is really, really helpful, because I know when you have like a flooding situation, and many women here will know what I mean by that, you kind of need that access to the basin privately. You don't even, even if it's a female only and you're going out to the basins, it's really uncomfortable. And certainly we should never have toilets ever where they are gender neutral or for everybody to use, and you have to go outside to use the basin. It would be horrific at these times of the month, and there shouldn't really be any companies that are actually doing that. I hope they're not. So it's either self-contained, or if you've got clusters, they should really be kind of male, female, and then have some gender neutral or universal in addition, would be my view, I think. And I think that aligns with the views of many others.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry, actually, I'm going to go to someone else just because you've asked a question. Sorry, lady over there.
Hello, thank you. I'm a workplace menopause consultant. I found your presentation hugely interesting. One of the things I've noticed working with companies is perhaps workspaces rather than workplaces. Working with pharmaceutical companies, for example, where you may have people in offices, in laboratories, on factory floors, how we provide for them can be hugely different. If a woman is flooding in an office, that can be a very different set of adjustments or facilities for that person compared to someone who's in a GMP area where they're not able to change their clothes straight away. They maybe have to be given permission to go offline, have their factory clothing destroyed actually. So I think it's really important that this is really helpful, but that we actually empower people, use people in those organisations to help us understand what good looks like for them in terms of adjustments. But I think this is really fantastic because it gives us so many opportunities to explore.
Thank you. You've raised some really good points there that I think has gone a step further to what we've considered. We haven't really considered that someone might be kind of trapped in the uniform they're in and be in that awkward situation, which is tricky and difficult to manage. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, lady in, so the lady in blue here. Oh, sorry. There's a lady in blue just here.
Sorry, I can shout. Hi, I'm Sarah from Talking Menopause. Just on the back of what Amantha was saying, I think, it's bringing it all together, isn't it? It's because it is that environmental side, which is so important and so varied depending on the different jobs, but right through to ultimately, if you have got all the environmental areas in place and you've got people on the ground starting to feel confident, but it's also linking in that manager's point as well and looking at that overall picture, but very much it is that individual cultural basis. I mean, I could write a book on stories from female firefighters right through to teachers in special needs schools, to police and fire, to some colleagues from Ministry of Justice here, people out in law courts. So it's so individualised, but I think the key thing overall, and this is such an amazing step forward in the right direction for actually having some practical standardisation out there, which is really real. I just wanted to add, and you know, I'm really grateful for all the work that some of you I know that you guys have all done, because actually I think it's going to, the work that Helen's also doing, just take it that step further, which is what's so needed in parallel to the work that a lot of people are doing in the medical community as well, because obviously on the other side, these poor people are still having this crazy postcode lottery to access that right level of support. So I just really wanted to, you know, to say thank you, and that individualisation, bringing all that overall picture together, I guess, on an individualised basis is so important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Gosh, I'm not quite sure who's next. It's quite scary. Lady in the orange over there.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you. I work for the Association of Independent Music, and more broadly in the music industry. As an industry, we over-index for freelancers. So when we're thinking about workplaces, we're not just thinking about the kind of SME businesses that I work with directly, but also about freelancers going into lots of different environments. And I wondered, I mean, firstly, I want to say how important this all is, and how useful it is, particularly for SME businesses, I think. But I wondered, are there any further steps planned to look at taking this thinking more broadly, so that all workers who are in the menopause or about to come into menopause are accommodated in different workspaces?
Ooh. I have to admit, I was desperate to know if there is advice specifically for freelancers and people. A lot of this does seem to apply, actually, what you said.
It could do. I don't know how you would get into it. I'm guessing, I'm kind of looking at somebody who's got HR time. Yeah, if you've got an answer on this one, please.
Yeah, I mean, as a freelancer.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I think as a former freelancer in financial services, I think one of the tricky things is you go into different organisations all the time and you don't know what you're walking into. So you're contracted to do a job and to deliver outputs, but you're not actually getting much say in anything else. So I think the onus really is an organisation that's looking after freelancers is actually to educate the freelancer in what they can do for themselves, what they should be asking for, and how they set themselves up for success. So we run a free Menopause the Basics course every 2 months so that we can get that basic information out to everybody and they can self-advocate, knowing that they've come from a trusted resource and they can set themselves up for success going forward, because that's one of the things when you are working independently, that you have to have that additional foresight into how you are going to work, where you're going to work, when you're going to work, how you're going to deliver that work. And then key to everyone is obviously self-care. How do you look after yourself? How do you make sure that you are looking after you so that you can produce the best for your family, your friends, your workplace, and everything else? So I don't know if that helps, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, lady with the blue shirt.
Just very quickly, will there be an opportunity to say something after all the speakers? Because I wanted to hear what everyone's got to say first.
I think we're hoping to have time for questions after the panel, which is after tea and coffee.
Well, I'd like to say something when I've heard all the speakers, but something I want everyone to hear.
We'll be coming back to questions then. Thank you.
Hi, this is going back to whoever spoke behind me I didn't see, and yourself. I was on the committee, and this was probably one of the hardest things we have written, because wording, reproductive health, menstruation, blood loss, getting it into being an acceptable, so we don't alienate audiences, we don't alienate SMEs. So it's not 100% perfect, this guide. It is a work in progress. And seeing everybody here today, majority are women, and I hope in a couple of years to repeat this event after the standard is going to be reviewed slightly earlier than normal, of the normal standard, because of this situation. This is one of the first ones, and I hope to see a mixture, so it's not just a woman's issue, because it isn't. And so any feedback here today on what terminology, wording you liked, you didn't like, what might work, would really help going forward promoting this. So, you know, when I speak about it, when all the panels speak about it, we can answer the questions, we can say we don't know everything. This is the best we could come up with in the time. And I was interested in that debate, because that debate happened for months on our panel of what was right and what was wrong. And we had to come up with the best we've got.
Thank you so much. We've got time for 2 more quick questions. If there's sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Liz St Pierre. I'm a station supervisor for London Underground, and I've got a question from my health and safety rep. She asked me to represent her today, so if I don't ask, she'll kill me. Right, she's what additional influences are required to enshrine menstrual menopausal guidance to become policy in the workplace?
I'm just batting this around. We're going to go to Anne Hayes for this one.
Okay, great question. So a standard is voluntary. So that's the first thing to say. It's not law. It is robust. It's not a must do. However, there isn't a lot of guidance out there that is written in a way that organisations can pick it up and use it. And that's exactly the gap that this standard is trying to achieve. And I'm not sure who the person was who said about the fact that, thank you, it will be reviewed. It will be reviewed. A standard is constantly reviewed, and that's why the beauty of a standard over regulation is that we can review it much quicker than you can change a law. So anybody who starts down the path of using this standard, it follows the same format as other standards will do and have done in the past. So things like occupational health and safety, quality management, environmental management, they're all very formulaic in the way they're set out so that any organisation can use it. So there isn't really an excuse to not start using it. You can start using it, you can start to use it in a quite an informal way, and then as it develops, you will then be in a great place to go forward and take it forward. Does that help? I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. I'm happy to talk to anyone about the use of standards afterwards. Quite boring on standards.
So basically, use the standard.
Use the standard because there isn't a lot else, you know. So if you want to make progress, if your organisations want to make progress, why wouldn't you use what's there?
So true. Thank you very, very much, Anne. I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to end.
Hi everyone, my name is Jyoti Sham. I'm the founder of AI health tech company, and we're building a precision health platform for menopause. And I think the only thing I wanted to add was we have so many workplace consultants here. I think if you could become a conduit to get that feedback from implementation at the workplaces and come back to the BSI team and the panel, that would help everybody. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now going to take a short break for 15 minutes. There's tea and coffee in the reception area, and we'll be starting again at promptly at 3:30. Thank you.
Well done.
That was very hot. Welcome back, everyone. What a vital discussion this promises to be, with so much that needs to be addressed around inclusivity and support in the workplace. Just to let you know, there were so many questions submitted for this panel that, having read them all, it's heartbreaking that we only have a limited amount of time in which to talk, and next time we need half a day for these questions alone. I'm just going to very quickly go back to Kylie. As we didn't ask her any questions, we have time for one question if anyone has anything to ask about creating a period positive workplace. Not at the moment, or ever, or you do? Oh, thank you. I think, will you shout?
Yes, I can shout.
Thank you.
I suppose my question lends itself to that there seems to be a lot of groundswell around policies to go into to promote need if it's required and reasonable adjustment. My nervousness is that we inadvertently create an environment where women have to feel or menstruators feel like they take time away from the workplace more so, and that in itself leads to ostracization or dynamic. So how can we drive policies that promote really good outcomes, but also keep women in the workplace?
I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying when I spoke about that. It goes back to what I was. Sorry, I'll just shout louder. It goes back to the presentation. Okay, so it goes back to the to what I was saying in the talk earlier, was just around that stigma, and it's about really trying to destigmatize menstruation and menopause in the workplace. It's not an easy thing to do, and obviously that's what we are. You know, that's why we're here, to really try to break down those barriers and help with that. There's no easy answer to that ostracization, unfortunately, and I think you are going to get people that feel that they're ostracized because of what they're going through, and you're also going to get people that feel that it's a privilege because they've got that, they're being allowed that time off. We've had it quite recently, and I can openly talk about this. I was on a talk with one of our customers, and we got asked a question, and the question was, well, females and gender neutral employees have a free period care provision. What do you have for men? And that's, you know, sometimes that's, you know, the workplaces that you're operating in. So it is going to be difficult. And I don't think I have the answer at the moment of what we can do for that ostracization. But it has to be built into the policy that it's normal. You know, that periods, the menopause are normal. And there's something that we need to be talking about in the workplace. And the kind of related symptoms that go with them do sometimes require time off of work for various reasons. So I think Lauren's going to answer as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. Right, turning to our panel, and I'm going to just say these as quickly as I can because there's so much that we're hoping to get through. Maria Tomlinson is a lecturer in public communication and gender at the University of Sheffield, and someone has asked, how do we break down the barriers that people find embarrassing around the subjects of menopause and menstruation? So very similar. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've already had lots of fantastic conversations today about the importance of kind of talking openly and inclusively about the topic. But there's loads of like amazing practical things that workplaces can do. And some of these are included in the standard as well. So we talked about menopause champions or menstrual health champions, also organising kind of informal networks where women and people can share their experiences of menstruation and menopause. Thank you so much. And just talking about this subject is so important. I mean, the research I'm doing at the moment about the menstrual movement and its impact on young people has shown that open conversations about menstruation on social media are making a difference. So some of the young people I spoke to in schools said that they read about periods on social media. And some of the girls said that, you know, thanks to seeing influencers or organisations talk about periods, they were now starting to speak deliberately about periods in front of boys to normalise it. And some of the boys that I spoke to said that they saw periods mentioned on social media as well, and they were starting to understand the importance of normalising open discussion about menstruation. I even had boys saying to me unprompted, let's normalise open talk about menstruation, let's reduce the shame around periods. So making sure that boys and men are part of this conversation as well is really important, and I think that's something that the menstrual movement can continue to focus on. I think it'll make a really big difference, but men are really important allies.
Thank you so much. And Sarah Williams, Equality Standards Consultant at Equality Counts. And you very much wanted to, you had something to contribute to that conversation, didn't you?
Have you got a question or?
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going back to that one. The question I had was, how can we ensure women's health and well-being needs are integrated in mainstream standards and don't require special or niche standards?
So I think this question refers to the other standards that are out there with BSI and with specific regard to their overarching wellbeing standard. So I can understand why people are fearful or overwhelmed of yet another set of guidelines to think about and include in their work. And yes, managers are, totally overwhelmed with different action plans. They need to be mental health experts, wellbeing experts, endo experts, fertility experts. But that's just not practical. But what we have here is kind of an overarching wellbeing standard, and then underneath that, this is my understanding with the BSI, that there will be kind of different elements of guidance that relates to, whether it's neurodivergence or mental health at work, fertility, and those, our menstrual health and menopause guidance is like 40-something pages long. So, you can't have one document that's like 550 pages, and, nobody's going to look at it. But within that overarching guidance, it can refer you then to, the specific information that relates to the subject. So you can get your technical information from this new standard, as well as the kind of soft skills information as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry, so these first questions are very much about the still taboo topics of menstruation and menopause. So Helen Tomlinson, just going to you, what are the most effective ways of breaking through taboos around menstruation and menopause in the workplace? And then secondly, how can we ensure these aren't held against people experiencing symptoms and therefore disadvantage them in career progression?
So I could probably answer that around the practical steps that we've taken as an organisation in order to start the conversation. And I'll go back to the fact that in 2021 we launched our own menopause policy, and very naively and in hindsight I thought, great, job done, we've got a menopause policy, brilliant. But actually all that served to do was, it was the catalyst that started the conversation that changed the culture of the organisation. So actually we created podcasts, we did podcasts with senior leaders who were prepared to talk about their menopause symptoms. As you probably know already, I spoke about my heavy periods during my perimenopause. Another of my colleagues who is in a really senior position in the organisation spoke about her brain fog, her loss of confidence, her feeling that actually she needed to step down as the senior vice president because she could no longer do that role. So what that started to do was open up the conversation within the organisation, that other people thought, well, actually, if they can talk about it openly, so can I. Or if they're, experiencing these things, it's okay for me to talk about it as well. So we did that. We launched the policy. We did management training, but every week we have, we call it an inclusion brunch, and basically it's 45 minutes. Anybody in the organisation can dial in, and our 4 different forums as part of our ED&I committee take it in turns to chair those, or launch the topic of those brunches. So what they do is they share lived experience, they educate and they celebrate if it's a topic that we would want to celebrate. And we launched menopause through that. So we'd already launched our policy, but I couldn't take over every inclusion brunch every week, which obviously I would have loved to have done on the topic of menopause. So then we set up a network, which is an allyship program, and then we set up we call it Tag Talk, the Adecco Group Talk, and it's a group of people who are willing to talk to people about what the challenges that they are facing and share their lived experience to help normalise what people are going through. And that has fundamentally changed the culture of the organisation. So, and we know that from we survey our colleagues 3 times a year through PCON, and our ED&I, our well-being and our feeling of belonging has gone up over the last 2 years a lot. Sorry, I've got a bit of brain fog there, I couldn't remember the words. Let's use a lot. But we've used that same process to launch a number of really challenging topics, and it's all started with lived experience. And I had a breakfast meeting with Alicia from Bloody Good Period this morning, who's in the audience, and she, it feels like a long time ago since breakfast time, but she mentioned a phrase which was experts by experience, and I think that is a really powerful phrase, and I will be using that moving forward. But that's how we launch those topics, to normalise them and have some really senior people being bold enough to start those conversations. And that's how, in my experience, we have prevented people from feeling like it is a taboo, and it's been being used against them. We are desperate to keep female talent in our organisation at all levels, whether that's senior leadership or through to our frontline staff, and I imagine that many other organisations are no different. So normalising it and reducing the taboo is such an important part of this process and strategy.
Thank you so much. And now going to Pamela Windle, Women's Health Coach and Menopause in the Workplace Specialist at Smarter Change. One of the hardest things for women is to prove their menopause symptoms when many are not visible, such as psychological symptoms or flooding, for example. What advice do you have for women to get over this hurdle?
I mean, if an organisation has a healthy relationship with their staff, shouldn't really have to prove anything at all. It should be given that whatever she's struggling with at work, that the line manager or senior leader actually just accepts that. But if it's an ongoing condition like heavy bleeding, for example, maybe she needs to have a letter from her GP if that makes her feel better. But the standard in itself just allows organisation, if that's the information in there is embedded within the organisation, that will then, we won't have that conversation. She won't actually have to prove anything, and she can remain in work.
Thank you very much. And Darren Dupre, Head of Local Government, Unison Cymru, Wales. How do we best involve men in the conversation, especially when working in a company that's predominantly male?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and one, thank goodness, I won't be accused of mansplaining about. Yeah. Oh, sets the tone. Well, what's really sort of important about involving men in the entire conversation? It's not just that we are the other half of the 50% or the 49%, but when I look around public services, lots of employers around, not just in Wales where I'm from, but across the UK, use female managers disproportionately, male managers everywhere. And part of my menopause journey, which I won't bore you with now, but part of the things which I have picked up along the way has been how difficult it is for women to have that courageous first conversation with their line manager. And I know that many women I've spoken to find that very first courageous conversation difficult with a female line manager, and even more difficult with a male line manager. So one of the approaches that we did at Flindra University NHS Trust, which is a big cancer hospital trust in Cardiff, was how we can engage specifically with men in the conversation around supporting their education, knowing that all the statistics were telling us that women themselves were saying that they were as prepared for menopause as they were for periods. So how much more difficult is it to expect men and male line managers to understand at all? So we had I would say it's a cheeky approach, whereby we included men in menopause training, not telling them that it was compulsory. And that was the background. And I heard just a couple of weeks ago that there was a big conference in London, whereby there was a big section was to talk about menopause, and a whole shed load of men in shirts and suits just walked out, shameful, in my view. But this is why it's so important to get men in. And I just, in terms of answering this question about how I can distill my menopause journey in terms of answering the question into 6 words: show up, stand up, and keep up. And the show up is if you get an opportunity to be able to go on some training, whether it's compulsory or not, and are engaged in it, do it, because it's the right thing to do. And of course, you become a better husband, brother, partner, uncle, human being. So yeah, show up, stand up, be an ally, and keep it up, which is the bane of a lot of the work that I do is going with employers, and you get the certificate on the back, you know, mental health champion. We've got the latest well-being and welfare certificate that they've got on the wall, and it stays on the wall alongside the menopause policy, which stays and gets dusty. Actually, the keep it up and the keep going is about delivering outcomes. Policies are great, but they're outputs. Delivering change, cultural change, and everything else within the workplace is outcomes, and that's the space we want to be.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Sarah, going back to you, every menopause is different. We're sort of focusing more on policy and change here. Every menopause is different. What kind of training do you foresee that organisations might implement, and are there specific topics that you'd recommend?
Thank you. Yes, and I think I can't sit here and not talk about diversity and inclusion in the menopause conversation. And this is one area that really can help an organisation, its people and its managers, to understand the sort of the real difference and diversity of experience. So I've got some colleagues here today and people from the Menopause Inclusion Collective, and we're really passionate that organisations need to understand how the intersectionality can impact somebody's experience of menopause, and this can show itself in the workplace as well. So we need to think about LGBTQ people from different backgrounds, cultural beliefs, people, global majority people. When we're talking about what you do at work and in your training offer, how do you know that your training provider has any awareness of diversity and inclusion issues? If you're an organisation that has quite a mixed demographic, across its staff, and you bring somebody in who just talks about one experience, well, that might not be helping 50% of your staff. Of your people. So I think we need to be a little bit more choosy about the offer that you take up when you're having your training. I've worked with some great organisations. I know Lauren's passionate about inclusion. I've worked with Sarah from Talking Menopause as well. They're hot on the inclusion agenda too. So I think, just to give an example, there's no point putting in your resource pack, oh, we have, an employee assistance programme, if your trans and non-binary members of staff can't get the right support and advice from that number, and global majority staff might not reach out to EAP programme because of issues around trust and healthcare. So training, just to summarise, a range of topics. I think you can keep, there's a technical element that managers need and soft skills as well, but they really do need to understand that this is about having a humanistic approach, a person-centred approach. They should have that already. In any one-to-one meeting, they should be curious about who they're speaking to. They should be seeing that person for who they are, not what they think they are because of what they see. So this is about management skills that you should be working on anyway, and you're just adapting them to this conversation. And yeah, you could have male only talking sessions if you wanted to. It's really important to include younger employees who do experience menopause, and even if it's not because of that small number of people that have premature ovarian insufficiency, what about cancer? People who've experienced cancer and have hysterectomy for that. I have surgical menopause, I have PMDD. There are lots of younger people who have these experiences. So the menstruation topic and BGP work around awareness around that is really important. So we need to bring all of these elements in. We also need to talk about neurodivergence as well. We've got more and more women in my age group, and I got my diagnosis last month as an autistic woman. Whee! And I'm happy to say that. But what's menopause and what's neurodivergence? What's menopause and what's stress? What's menopause and a bereavement, or your kids leaving home, or your divorce, or your relationship? Menopause is kind of running underneath all of those life events and those important factors. So having training that really gets, has these deeper conversations maybe, because you can get the technical information elsewhere. So that's my take on training.
Wow, thank you so much. And Helen, how important do you think it is for employers to recognise this workplace issue and follow the new BSI standard? Hopefully really important. Otherwise it's going to be super awkward. And so what are your recommendations for writing a good company policy on menstruation and menopause?
Well, first of all, obviously, I think it's super important that employers use that. But no, it absolutely is. And the fact that I'm here today is because it is free to any employer, regardless of the size of their organisation, the size of their budget, and it will help to make it available, that support, to anybody in their organisation, regardless of sector, job type, etc. So I think it's fundamentally important, and as I said earlier, I'm delighted that it includes, so it's right through the whole women's health life cycle in employment, and it includes menopause, menstrual health and menstruation. So yeah, absolutely. And I've totally forgotten the second part of the question, so if you could just remind me of that. Sorry.
What are your recommendations for writing a good company policy?
Okay, so I think the more succinct it is and the less headings there are, the easier it is for somebody to follow and to actually use it, because I think you alluded to earlier about a policy that just sits at best. It is a PDF with some words on it. So unless it lives and breathes, and coming from a sales organisation, the less words there are in something, the more chance you've got of making it live and breathe. So the key roles, the responsibilities, the support available, the guidance for employers, the guidance for colleagues, symptom checklists, suggested reasonable adjustments based on role and sector are really important. But I would go back to the fact that it is literally a document, and a document doesn't change the culture of an organisation. It is how you launch it and implement it that will have the lasting change in the organisation.
Thank you very much indeed. Pamela, a question we've had is, we already have a menopause safe space. However, what advice can you provide to get employers to listen to our needs instead of being focused on accreditations from external companies?
Yeah, it's a good question. So accreditation has its place, definitely. It obviously sets standards, but if an organisation only has accreditation in supporting women in the workplace in terms of menopause, then really it's not worth anything. I believe that from an organisation point of view, the senior leader really needs to be committed to the change within the organisation and really own it as well. And when that happens, that's when you get the cultural changes that will enable women to remain in work, whether it is through menstruation or the menopause long term. And it needs to be coming from that angle, really.
Thank you very much indeed. And Maria, what are your top three practical tips on how to make the workplace environment a more supportive place in which to be doing your job?
Ooh, great question. So the first thing kind of reiterates what's been said before about creating a really kind of supportive and inclusive workplace environment where employees feel they can raise issues that are important to them and need to be addressed around menstruation and menopause. And the second one, practical guidance. I think, because I come from as a menstrual health scholar, the importance of having menstrual products and bins in all toilets, including having women's toilets, having men's toilets, and having gender neutral toilets too. And this kind of goes back to the interesting conversation we were having earlier about how can these things benefit men, specifically I think cisgender men we were talking about. And there are cisgender men who go through prostate cancer treatment that need bins, and there are men that need bins in bathrooms for other reasons. So this is something that benefits the whole workplace environment. And as well, I think another tip as well would be to kind of raise awareness around specific kind of menstrual health conditions like endometriosis and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And again, I think conversations about mental health and menstrual health are going to benefit the whole workplace, because if you create a workplace in which you can talk openly about menstrual health and mental health and things like PMDD, that could also encourage people of any gender to talk about other menstrual health issues and help break stigma and taboos around that. I think that often kind of stigma taboos around mental health and people's bodies are kind of interlinked. So, you know, how can we create a workplace environment where we can feel confident and supported?
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Darren, how can small businesses, small teams, and those who, and I think the lady over there was touching on this earlier, those who are working with many freelancers best provide support?
Well, if you're a freelance, I'd obviously suggest join a union. And if you're a journalist, join the NUJ. And if you're a freelance in any other organisation, there will be a union for you. I have to say that because there's no point me being here if I don't. I'm not shy to admit that I'm a trade union official and have seen the power of. I will come to the answer, I promise, but have seen the power of trade unions in a good way, working in partnership with organisations to deliver menopause support and awareness at work. And that's because we don't just come from it from the perspective of it's not a women's issue, which it isn't, but we come from it from the perspective this is a workplace justice issue, just like freedom from misogyny, sexual harassment and everything else is not a women's issue. And neither is menopause support and awareness at work. And we've done like shed loads over the years. I don't want to be controversial, well before Davina, and I'm saying that with a large amount of tongue-in-cheek. But there has been a long history of providing support. So in terms of sort of freelancers, that is not my expertise. But what I would say was that there was an answer to the question a little bit earlier. I know that, for example, many freelancers have a portfolio career, and as part of the conversation that we have in terms of reasonable adjustments, the ability to be able to work flexibly, the ability to have flexible deadlines, the ability to work from home and to have access to all of the things actually we're fighting for in workplaces, but actually can't quite get yet because of design and hoping to retrofit designs. So there is a little bit of a good news story, if I'm not going to get myself into any trouble, in terms of people who are freelancers and work from home. But in terms of small businesses, which again is not my expertise, thank you for that. But what I would say is that the benefit of BSI and the panel that we had, and I think we'd all agree on this, is that we were trying to think front and centre of all the organisations that we weren't particularly experts on, to ensure that they were sort of like covered. So I work for a public service trade union. We normally have large hospitals, councils, utilities, large companies, British Gas, Welsh Water and all of that. But we specifically tried to be able to tailor this standard so that it would be attractive to small businesses, sometimes to sole owners who employed freelancers as well. And I think because people talked about a compromise earlier, and I want to ensure that compromise is glass half full, not half glass empty, to get to mix it up. Because actually, I think we all ended up being very, very proud of this document and how it could be picked up by an organisation without a HR department, without a training department, in fact, without a budget, and with the ability to be able to transform a workplace, not overnight, because we talked about the cultural aspect, but small businesses and small teams who are also able to be very, very close to their workforce could actually, in no sense of irony, be the best test bed for this standard.
Thank you very much indeed. You have no idea how many pages of questions I still have, but I'm also aware that we very, very much want to open up questions to you guys. So does anyone have any questions for, I knew this was going to happen. Lady in pink at the back.
Hi, I'm Sarah Clifford. I work for the Disclosure and Barring Service, which is an ALB of the arm's length body of the Home Office, and I'm the menopause sponsor. I just wondered, well, the whole panel, but particularly Helen, the issues around women's confidence and the talent pipeline. One of the big issues for us is 62% of our workforce are female, a big chunk of those are over 40. And what our colleagues are saying to me is their confidence, and I know because I've been there myself, confidence just gets completely knocked out of you. And so colleagues are just not going for promotion, or they're struggling even to stay, and they feel it's even to stay in the job they've got. So what are the practical things an employer can be doing to support those women and make sure their talent pipeline is as inclusive as possible in relation to both menstruation and menopause?
Absolutely, and I felt exactly how you just said then, for sure, and we see it all the time. And I think that safe space, that opening up the conversation, again, it comes back to the cultural piece that, the majority of women in senior roles that leave their job because of menopause, it's not because of the practical aspects of it, because generally they have the level of opportunity and flexibility to be able to manage those really practical aspects that probably somebody in a different job or a different sector wouldn't necessarily be able to do. So it comes down to that feeling of confidence, feeling of anxiety, not being on top of your game, etc. And and there's not a vast amount that an employer can practically do about that. The reasonable adjustments for it are relatively limited. So the ability to have the conversation and feel confident and comfortable having the conversation is actually probably the most important thing. So, us doing a podcast and opening it up that way really helped to do that. And having those safe spaces and that kind of thing to be able to do that is really important. So the cultural piece will go a long way to allowing women to feel that they can be open about the experiences that they're having and feel comfortable going into a meeting saying, as I've already said, I am perimenopausal. I may forget my words in this session, but I'm bringing my whole self to the meeting, which is really what we want to be able to do in the workplace. So it comes down to the openness and the conversation. And somebody touched earlier on sort of the changes in that culture, and what I've seen is both internally, commercially and with government being asked to do more and more of those line manager sessions, and a lot of them have been at the request to be male only. So I did one for DWP not that long ago, and what I've noticed in terms of the changes, that when I was doing that kind of thing maybe 18 months ago, I wasn't getting the uptake that I am. So being able to support the conversation that I am now, as an example, when I did one internally 2 years ago, I had 2 men dial into it from 2 male managers, and one of them had dialed into the wrong call, but he was that embarrassed he didn't dial off. But I've seen a massive step change in that, and that again comes down to that opening up the conversation and feeling supported. We run programs called Elevating Women in Leadership, and a lot of it is about confidence, opening up the conversation and that kind of thing. But if you haven't got that culture of open conversation in your organisation at every level, that's not going to land.
Thank you. And Sarah. Sorry.
Yes, just to comment on that as well, I think from maybe a slightly more a different perspective is that as women, we've possibly had a lifetime of working in environments of gendered ableism, ageism and sexism, and maybe by the time if we are having an average menopause in our midlife, our confidence is knocked as well because we're not being heard. So there's an element of this as well, which is about inclusive leadership and people taking responsibility and accountability for their behaviours and the way that they contribute to the culture in the workplace. So, there is an element around confidence being impacted because of things like anxiety, but also it's about the actual culture in that workplace. And I think we can't overlook that and pretend it's not happening.
Thank you. And there was a gentleman over here who wanted to speak earlier, and actually I know the point he's going to make is very valid. I hope that's okay.
Afternoon. Firstly, I greatly applaud all the huge work that's been done by everyone. But a lot of what I hear is sort of top down and structured office environments, line managers and so on. I come from 40 years running construction companies and building sites, and what goes on there has no relationship to what's been talked about. The thousands of women who work in construction and thousands who would like to, but the attitude, the likes of Persimmon, they've probably done enough to tick a box in the health and safety checklist for menopause and menstrual health issues. But on the great majority of building sites, there's no line. No line manager. There's a foreman, and the attitude is probably, if you don't like the heat in the kitchen, get out of the kitchen, get on with it, deal with it.
Could I put that to the panel and see if they have any? Do any of you have any comments that could perhaps respond?
There's a bit more I'd like to say, but yes, please do.
Is that all right? I'm so sorry. I'm so constantly aware of time, which no one else has to be. Thank you, Pamela.
Yeah. I mean,
thank you so
much. I spoke to the gentleman earlier today in the break, and in answer to the other question that the lady asked at the back, I think as an organisation, whether it's top down or whether it is the other way that you mentioned, fundamentally it's about also empowering women to take ownership of their health as well. And we've talked about nutrition. Nutrition is a vital part of this. And from an organisation point of view, when we go into organisations, we actually support those women to make those changes and also look broadly. It's not just the menopause, what else is happening for that woman? What are the health conditions, for example, particularly like sleep was one of the questions we were going to talk about earlier. Has she got the building blocks to sleep? Estrogen is part of that, but then if she's struggling with heavy bleeding from fibroids or endometriosis, then iron is part of that building blocks. And then, if she's got PCOS, then it's highly likely she's going to be potentially type 2 diabetic, and that could impact her sleep as well. So when we go into organisations and actually support women, really educate them about the lifestyles that they take, the mindset that they have around their health. We've all been brainwashed thinking that health looks like this, when actually it doesn't. It's a very different thing for women's health in terms of if we support our hormones, then that's how, from a nutritional point of view and lifestyle, that's how we get the results. So from an organisation, whether it is they don't have line managers or they do, actually supporting women in the workplace, educating them is really key.
But none of that opportunity exists. They don't have, they're not able to do that. They're flattened, they're pushed away from dealing with those issues. And what happens on construction sites happens in the majority of small SMEs, workshops, clothing places, food industry. There is nothing there. They're not allowed to do anything.
And I thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. Lady in the blue.
Oh, which? Sorry. To answer your question, the HSE are not as far ahead as the BSI, and until the HSE starts to adopt the BSI, then we're not going to get anywhere in construction. There are some small changes. I've been on construction sites where they will have a small room for breastfeeding for engineers who are breastfeeding, that type of thing, but that is proactive people that are doing that. But what's coming through because of the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Equality Act and the management regs, because reproductive health, gender health, identity has been ignored, and it's been allowed to be ignored, that's why we're here, it is changing, and soon organisations like the HSE will not be able to ignore it. It isn't getting there, but this first of its kind document will shame other organisations of why they're not protecting their workforces. I completely agree with you, but wanted to give you a bit of hope. Yes, they need fining. Now, how many organisations are fined for psychological stress? HSE threatened that they would, but that they're not for, but that is a hazard, the same as physical hazards. So hope that it is changing. Thank you.
Stop you there, and thank you so very much. Thank you. And finally, it is my great pleasure to welcome presenter, journalist and campaigner Mariella Frostrup. In 2018, she made her acclaimed BBC programme, The Truth About the Menopause, and then wrote the best-selling book, of which I was fortunate enough to be co-author, Cracking the Menopause, which was published in 2021. Last year, she co-founded the campaign group Menopause Mandate, of which she is chair. She has spoken and written widely about the importance of menopause education, access to treatment, and informed choice. Currently helming her own afternoon show on Times Radio, Mariella was recently named one of Vogue's 25 most influential women in the UK. Her wit, passion, and quick mind are legendary. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Alice. Wit, what else did you say? Look, brain fog. I'm afraid that I was going to say fresh from my radio show, but that would be the wrong description of how you feel after 2 hours of live radio in 3 days so far. I've just done one more to go. Anyway, I'm absolutely delighted to be here in such excellent company. I'm not sure what the collective noun is for business people, a success, a drive, a host, I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm delighted to see you all here. And I was just listening to this session here. I mean, such a fascinating panel, and just listening to people speak with such passion and eloquence about women's health. I think we all have to remember how unusual just that very thing is, and how far we've come already. It looks like it's been an incredible afternoon, chock full of informative talk from an array of speakers about an array of topics that were, ironically, considered unspeakable. As a teenage girl who used to hide her tampons under a cereal box when I'd go to the shops to get them, I didn't even need the cereal, so that no one knew I was having a period, to find myself on this platform and deeply immersed in the issues being discussed feels like the great world has really spun, to paraphrase the wonderful author Colin McCann. If you haven't read his book, Let the Great World Spin, may I highly recommend it. Menstruation, menopause and the workplace are very much the topics du jour. I can only congratulate the BSI on their excellent standard and full-on recognition of the zeitgeist. The standard has already had such an impact and promises to have far more over the following years. Standards aren't necessarily what we expect in the world at the moment, exposed as we are to the incessant lowering of them in so many aspects of our lives, from the political world to the online world, where anonymous voices create Salem-like conditions without a shred of what used to be called common decency. So, what a pleasure it is to be here at an institution devoted to creating positive standards that can be referred to and measured and ultimately will lead to making our lives better. Embarrassingly, until this year, sorry, my glasses have stretched because I keep wearing them on my head, I keep sliding down my nose. Embarrassingly, until this year, I was woefully ignorant of the BSI's work and didn't really realize it was possible to create a standard for the workplace that could play a key role in embracing women's biological journey instead of sidelining it as a pesky stumbling block to continuing business as usual from century to century, the long, linear, hierarchical progression best suited to the male of the species. I didn't understand that we needed a standard for the workplace. I just knew full well that we didn't have legislation protecting those of us whose possession of ovaries, wombs and vaginas made our working lives different and far less linear, perhaps, to the experience of the other half of the population. Why it still comes as a surprise that a different arrangement of hormones means just that, not demanding or difficult, but different, I don't know, but there are unquestionably still many people who look upon 50% of the population's biology as inferior and irritating. So I can't quite emphasize my joy enough at the excellent, beautifully researched and perfectly presented new standard, Menstruation, Menstrual Health and Menopause in the Workplace, launched with a fanfare of excitement, news stories and general joy this year, deserving of all of them. I've read it from start to finish, though I won't be taking questions, thank you. But I can assure you that it is a masterpiece, and I've read a few of those. There is, I've recently learned, a standard for everything. There are standards for all manner of sectors, food and retail, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, the list goes on, I'll try not to. Standards are the structure around which our workplaces and economy are woven and built. And as I say, I had no fully formed understanding of their imperative contribution to our lives until we spoke with BSI before our last menopause mandate meeting in Parliament, and were fortunate enough to have a preview of the current one. Looking on the BSI website, I read that new standards are developed when there's a market or organizational need for one. From an employer point of view, a standard can help a business to succeed, reduce costs, boost growth, and, which is really the end game of any business, help companies become more profitable. In the case of menstruation, menopause, and the associated joys, this is the sort of clear, blue sky thinking and policy that we desperately need. I can't help wondering why the entire governing of the UK isn't handed over to the BSI. Let's just get it over and done with. Maybe they're just too professional. The aim of this particular standard is for organisations to do more for those employees suffering from the impact of a totally natural biological progression from menstruation to menopause, with all the stuff imperative to our survival as a species in between, including but not primarily focused on fertility, which has been the case for far too long. The standard can be used, if necessary, to point employers in the right direction, but really, it's to enable everyone to do better, to make life easier, and to facilitate employees to continue working. As I say, I'm not going to deconstruct the whole thing. You can all do that at your own leisure, but I will flag up a few excellent points. It tackles myths, reminds employers that they should recognise that there are racial and ethnic disparities in experiences, something that's coming to the fore more and more at the moment and needs to be highlighted by all of us. And it gives clear and very practical suggestions for employers, many of whom do come up with baffled looks on their faces, just going, we really want to do something, but we don't know what to do. Well, here's a clue, more than a clue, a direction. The emphasis is on education, awareness, and an individual approach that considers the diversity of experiences. I'd like to think that it's going to be launched on a global scale. One of the great rewards of the work we've been doing recently on menopause is that many other countries are looking to the UK for inspiration. How wonderful to think that we might be global leaders in something. If only there had been a standard in place throughout my personal, and I absolutely hate this word and I hate using it, but it just felt appropriate here, journey. I can't think of a better word in a way, because that's what we all go through. Though I say that, it's not really been so much of a progressive journey as a slow dawning realization that awareness about women's health has been so appalling that even I, a dedicated campaigner for women's rights my entire career, my entire life, seem to have overlooked parts of it, as demonstrated by my lack of knowledge about my own menopause. It's the biggest elephant in the room ever, or at least it was a few years ago, and hopefully gradually is dissipating. The biological experience of women, including trans men and those who identify as non-binary, affects over half the population, 52% of the population. As such, it surely ought to be an instant number one, or maybe we'll put up with number two priority on any government or employer healthcare agenda. Rather, it's been the case that our health has relied for far too long on the idea that the possession of certain physical attributes means that we are lesser versions of humanity. The spare rib theory has haunted us down the ages with the assumption that we're fashioned from a cast-off bit of male anatomy and our health needs are one and the same, or, where they diversify, irrelevant. I absolutely can't myself complain about menstruation or indeed pregnancy on a personal level. The only downside to pregnancy for me was my horrific craving for sardines. My husband would come home and find me inside the fridge door, like cramming another load of them. And I mean, that's not physically unpleasant, I suppose, unless you're trying to kiss me afterwards. But our boss at the BBC did, I remembered when I was jotting down notes for this speech, tell me when I returned to work 12 weeks after my second child that my breastfeeding schedule was inconveniencing the production of the culture show. I'm very happy to say that that would never happen now. I think such accepted misogyny is no longer tolerated. But I have to admit that my own menopause hit me like a truck, an invisible one, as I had no idea at all, utterly clueless about what was coming down the track at me. I mean, it's shameful. It feels shameful now because things have already started to move on, which is a really positive thing. But, you know, I went through 2 years of low-level anxiety, high-level insomnia, completely oblivious to the idea that this complete change of character and alarming struggle to cope might have anything to do at all with midlife hormones. Menopause was something you didn't talk about, and you knew you had it if you had a hot flush or 10. And that was it. So it just never even occurred to me. I suffered from really horrendous anxiety. But completely irrational. You know, I'd be as agitated about, you know, whether I'd ordered tomatoes on the supermarket list to whether we could achieve world peace or whether I was getting home in time to relieve the babysitter. I mean, everything was at a completely heightened level, and I just had no clue about what was happening. Incidentally, back then, just a few years ago, I definitely didn't have the confidence or indeed the knowledge of the subject to be standing here. My 50th birthday was a particularly muted event, as I just couldn't face large crowds at all. My 60th, I'm happy to report, just a few months ago, was a rather raucous weekend with dear friends, probably, yeah, embarrassingly raucous, really, with dear friends and family, from which I emerged exhausted but very happy. But back to perimenopause. I mean, my temper was horrific. I suspect my husband would gladly testify to this, but he says all of it was horrific. Pregnancy, everything really, getting me pregnant in the first place. I mean, it's a sort of constant. It's nice to have a constant in life, isn't it? But alongside the kind of temper was the self-loathing and the confusion, because I didn't know what it was. So I just thought I was actually falling apart, and also that I'd lost myself. I just couldn't find myself in this morass of hormonal activity, as I understand it now. I'll gloss over the road to diagnosis, but as is the case for so many women, it was a bit of a postcode and also bank balance lottery. I ended up going private in order to just get some answers, and I was very, very lucky to be able to do that. I know there are lots of people who go private and don't get their answers, so there is no, one size fits all on that. But suffice it to say, there's a happy ending, a sort of happy HRT packed ending for me, anyway. Did my career suffer? Probably yes. But like every other woman on the planet, until very recently, there's only been the niggling sensation of feeling below par and trying to mitigate and, most importantly, disguise what pesky hormones are putting us through. Instead of shaping the working world around our imperative presence in it, and I mean economically imperative presence in it, we're forced to try and find space for our inclusion, and that has until recently depended on maintaining a male standard. And that's really the issue, because it's a playing field full of lumps and bumps that only one half of the population have to navigate, and until recently appeared to the other a handicap they hoped we'd find a way through whilst keeping our noses firmly to the grindstone. So like most other women, I just got on with it. We've been bred to be stoic, to accept hormones and hormonal turbulence as our lot, and to pretend actually that our hormones don't really exist, especially when it comes to work. I struggled horrendously. Brain fog and irritability, I can't even say it, irritability aren't ideal when you're on live radio. Neither is lack of sleep. But in our book, Cracking the Menopause, we wrote about menopause being the third shift, something to be got on with alongside work and home life, the only ones to really suffer being, of course, women. Had there been the awareness of these life stages that there are today, a mere decade on, then perhaps I might have recognised my symptoms better, sooner, been supported when they were at their most debilitating, and navigated my way through this inevitable biological phase. Most importantly, it could have been a shared experience to laugh about with friends over a glass of wine, recklessly ignoring the bad night's sleep that would ensure. And maybe I would have felt confident enough even to mention it at work. Of course, being me, once I had my hands on a pocket full of HRT, which coincided with the NICE guidelines, God bless the NICE guidelines, if only they were employed more often. So it coincided with the NICE guidelines being rewritten. I started to write and talk and actually make a documentary about menopause and why it's so badly needed, demystifying. But all the elements of our biology, from menstruation to menopause, have been seen as an inconvenience in the workplace. Periods, pregnancy and associated complications, pregnancy loss, fertility problems, fibroids, endometriosis, and PMDD, all until very recently swept under the carpet. And all of this because it's not been of interest to those who've historically written the medical textbooks and made the rules. It's effectively a gaslighting and a cover-up bigger than the fact that there was room on that floating door in Titanic. A good example, perhaps, of how it all started is back in 300 BC when Aristotle, the revered Greek philosopher, we might question why, suggested that the reason we have periods is because we are colder than men, as well as less active, positively lazy. So we need to get rid of our excess blood. I'd be tempted to scrutinise Aristotle's pioneering philosophies with a stern eye if they're anything like as flawed as his description of women's bodies. Periods, according to Aristotle, are the process of getting rid of this excess blood, hence the issue when menstruation stops. Whereas men, of course, are constructed with perfect balance and just the right amount of heat and blood, which they make into semen, for which we're incredibly grateful. This idea of menstruation as a cleansing process of some sort or other endures for almost another 2,000 years. Incidentally, just in case you can't get enough of Aristotle, he thought of women as mutilated males. He may have kicked off the theme of women being little more than an embarrassing biological footnote, but things are only just changing now, and medical misogyny, I'm afraid, still remains rife. Obviously, the presence of ovaries and wombs doesn't make us second best. Just listen to that sentence and how ludicrous it sounds. Nor are they impediments that need to be worked around. Our biology is what should be shaping business as we go forward. That means that working practice must fundamentally change to stop the brain drain that happens along the route of the female biological journey that just happens to coincide with our working lives. And that's what I see starting very gradually to happen now. The realization that our biology isn't something to apologize for, but accepted as a part of our lives with time and research devoted to how we can be at our individual best and supported when it comes to the occasional trial and tribulation. As I emerged from my own experience of menopause, an educated journalist considering myself to be well informed and aware of my body, I was really, really shocked at the dearth of general knowledge about the subject, and I remain so. I mean, if only my company had had a standard, my various companies, I mean, I don't mean my various companies, I'm not a magnet, but the various companies I work for, then my experience might have been preempted. And now that's true for so many women out there. You know, now we have the possibility of being understood what might happen, and the possibilities of adjustments being made that very simply just make working life better. And this is right across the board as well. I mean, it's not just in the area of menopause, and that's what I feel so passionately about today, because working in the menopause sphere has only highlighted for me the fact that, you know, right across the board, women's biology is seen as something that we have to apologize and make up for, that we need mentors to help us through, and so on. And what we've entirely failed to grasp is that we are 50 to 52% of the population, and absolutely imperative to the future of our world. And so actually it's a woman-shaped space that we want in the working world, and it's a completely different shaped space to the linear hierarchical one that I referred to earlier that men have created because their bodies work differently. It's not as an act of, you know, punishment to us, but I think it's just what's happened to evolve, and that's what we need to change today. It's not minor adjustments and slight tweaks. You know, who'd ever have thought that we'd be working, you know, flexi hours and flexi days until the pandemic came along and actually opened the world's eyes to the fact that there were different ways to do things. And that's what we need to continue with today. I interviewed just a few weeks ago on my program on Times Radio, a young woman, I think just in her early 30s when I spoke to her about her endometriosis. And what she described was just, it was spellbinding radio because it was so horrifically unjust. 10 years of excruciating agony that was repeatedly dismissed as just painful periods, and that she needed to just suck it up and get on with it. She had to pretend she was fine until a decade later she really wasn't. By the time she was diagnosed, after a whole 10 years of humiliation and career setbacks, any of you who've actually found yourselves calling up a boss and saying to them, I'm sorry, I've got bad period pain, will know that you're treated often as though you're calling up with a hangover, or it's a bare excuse for something else that you've been up to. And this was something that this woman had endured for over a decade. And so by the time she was diagnosed, after this decade of humiliation and career setbacks, her condition was critical because endometriosis obviously gets worse. Her career was in tatters and her fertility entirely gone. Her story doesn't just highlight the agonies that we might face, but also the patronizing, I'm afraid, and unhelpful societal attitude that covers the female situation. You know, as I just mentioned, it's seen as flaky, shameful even, to call your boss and say you're having a bad period, or indeed that you haven't slept because of menopausal symptoms. And both those things just add extra stress to an already stressful situation. Here are some statistics to further show the need for this standard and support for us. 1.5 million British women suffer from endometriosis. As many as 30% have moderate to severe PMS, and 5 to 8% have PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. In addition, according to Women's Health Concern, 1 in 3 describe their period as heavy, and at least 1 in 20 women speak to their doctor every year about this problem, as did the young woman that I spoke to. According to the brilliant Fawcett Society report from last year, Menopause in the Workplace, 1 in 10 women who work during the menopause have left their job due to menopause symptoms. 8 out of 10 say their employer hasn't shared information, trained staff, or put in place a menopause absence policy. When it comes to menstruation, this all makes just dismal listening. And also worryingly, as I do now go often to different companies to give talks, I'm often accosted in the toilet afterwards, something that began after I made the menopause documentary and has continued ever since. The toilet's now no longer a refuge for me, but somewhere where I have some of my most heated discussions. But I often find myself in these companies, and having listened to, you know, various bosses describe the wonderful policies that they have in place, the menopause mentor, etc., and then have women tell me that actually the culture is completely different and that nothing has changed. And I'm really sad to say that I think perhaps meno-washing might be a new inclusion in the Oxford Dictionary next year. The workplace, as I've said, is designed in a linear, hierarchical and patriarchal fashion. No wonder, after hundreds and indeed thousands of years. It's not because we're being actively discriminated against, but because the female form is such a relatively new presence in every walk of working life. If you want women and trans women and non-binary to be involved and to stay involved, and frankly, if you want your business to be successful, you don't have a choice, and you want them to give their best and to actively aid your company's success, then it's got to be a sea change, not just little changes, as I said, and tweaks, but an absolute acceptance that the world that we live in now has been constructed around one half of humanity and not around the other. And that is what needs to change, a tsunami of change from the ground up. What I rejoice over, and the BSI standard is an excellent example of this, is the fact that menstruation, pregnancy and menopause are finally, in 2023, accepted as not just an inconvenience, but a fact, and one to be openly and enthusiastically celebrated for its imperative to the future of our species, not just as something that stops us being as biologically perfect, apparently, as the male of the species. And I think it's really, really great that so many of you are here today highlighting the fact that businesses are finally taking responsibility for the health of half of their employees. The amount of successful people taking a stand, using their voices, is increasing daily. All of you here today, my menopause sisters, including Davina, Penny Lancaster, Lisa Snowden, Michelle Griffith-Robinson and Gabby Logan, of course my co-author Alice, whose safe hands you've been in all day. There's also Daisy Network, raising awareness of premature ovarian insufficiency, and of course Davina McCall and Kate Muir have recently spoken out about contraception as well, and its failings. I am personally incredibly proud to have been a part of the discussions, and as chair of Menopause Mandate pioneered some of them. I'm just as excited also to have the conversation opened up even further, and along with colleagues such as BSI, it looks set to continue, improve and perhaps get even louder. But if you leave this room with anything from what I've said, I really think it has to be a wholesale revolution. You know, the times have come for change, and it really needs to happen now. It's a completely ridiculous, unsustainable, and I think unjust situation still, and we need to change that. Each and every one of us can play a part. Thank you.
Right.
Isn't she a wonder?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariella. And thank you to everyone who has been here, who's working towards a more inclusive and supportive working environment. And finally, I'm going to hand you over to the excellent Anne Hayes for her closing words, after which you're invited to join us for drinks. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Tough act to follow, just so we all know. So what I'm going to say is that I believe the revolution has started. I believe that this standard is a great tool for you. I also believe that there are drinks outside, so I'm not going to go on too long. There are three things that really struck me today are sort of the role of this standard is to normalise the conversation. So there's a document out there that you can now take into your workplaces, you can talk to people about it, and actually you have a starting place in order to have that conversation. The other key thing is not one size fits all. What might work for our organisation might not work in another organisation, and I think that's come up a number of times in the questions, and I really can't emphasise that enough. The standard doesn't say you have to do one thing, it gives you a whole plethora of ideas and things that you can use about it. And finally, there's been a lot of questions today around, or comments today around people leaving the workforce early, not necessarily of their own choice, but because they feel it's impossible to go on. And I'm actually, coincidentally, really proud to say that today BSI have launched some research that we've done globally on the second glass ceiling and why women leave the workplace. And so there should be a QR code that will appear in a minute, and if it doesn't, we'll make sure you get it, so that you can download that report, because all of this information, which is validated information, is out there to help that conversation that you can take back to your businesses. Our board constantly asks me about what is the call of action that you're giving people. So my call of action to you is to say, you need to go out of here and you need to tell at least 5 people about this standard, and you need to tell them that they need to download it. It's free to download. We will take on board comments, or at least the team at BSI will, not me personally, but we will all gather together and take on board the comments. We want to make it a success. We believe we have a real opportunity to make a difference, and having you all here today and online just makes that easier for us. So thank you for your attention. Please stay for a drink and some food. And we really appreciate the efforts you've all made to get here today, because I know transport and schools situations has made that difficult. So thank you very much. And thank you to Alice, actually. Huge thank you.